It was April 3rd, 2016, just outside Cedar Falls, Iowa, when Rick Halverson stood on the back of a flatbed trailer and told a quiet man he had 90 days left. The wind that morning carried the smell of wet soil and diesel, the kind of smell that only farmers notice. A dozen trucks were parked along the gravel lot of Halvorsen equipment, their polished chrome catching the early sun. New Case IH machines lined the yard behind him, red, clean, expensive, and standing just beyond that shine was Daniel Carter. Rick didn't look at him at first. He addressed the crowd instead, voice loud, confident, the voice of a man who owned things. 90 days, he said, holding up a sheet of paper. That's what happens when you don't adapt, when you refuse to move forward. Then he finally turned, and you, Daniel, you've been given more time than you deserve already. A murmur moved through the crowd. Some men shifted their weight, others leaned forward. Daniel didn't move. He stood beside his tractor, an old Case IH faded. Red paint chipped the metal, worn smooth in places where hands had touched it for decades. It looked like it belonged to another time. Rick smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "You're still running that thing?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's not a tractor. That's scrap metal with nostalgia." A few men chuckled. Rick stepped closer, tapping the hood of Daniel's machine with the back of his hand. "You think this will save your farm?" he continued. "You think stubbornness is a strategy?" The laughter grew louder now. Not cruel at first, just uncomfortable. But it didn't stay that way. A younger man, clean boots, pressed shirt, one of the engineers Rick had brought in from Des Moines, crossed his arms and shook his head. "With all due respect," he said, not sounding respectful at all. "Machines like that weren't built for modern yield expectations. It's not just outdated, it's inefficient." Someone behind him added, "It's dead weight." And just like that, the words, dead weight. It echoed across the gravel lot, bouncing between men who had already made up their minds. Rick let the silence stretch just long enough to make it sting. "Then if you can't pay what you owe in 90 days, Daniel, I'll take the land." That was the moment, not the laughter, not the insult. That. Because land out here wasn't just property. It was memory. It was blood. It was everything a man didn't say out loud. Daniel looked at Rick for a long second. Not angry, not pleading, just steady. Then he nodded once. No speech, no defense, just a quiet nod, as if he had already heard worse things in his life and survived them. What most people saw in that moment was defeat. But what they didn't see was that Daniel Carter had never been the kind of man who spoke before he understood something fully. And this story was never really about a man who couldn't keep up. It was about a man who had been waiting, because long before that morning in 2016, before the debt, before the threat, before the laughter, there had been another man standing in that same field, Daniel's father. His name was Thomas Carter, and he wasn't known for talking either. People in Cedar Falls used to say Thomas could listen to an engine the way other men listened to a conversation. He didn't read manuals much, didn't trust them, said machines told the truth if you let them. Daniel had grown up in the shadow of that belief. As a boy, he didn't play in the yard the way other kids did. He sat on overturned buckets in the workshop, watching his father take apart engines piece by piece, not rushing, not explaining, just working. Sometimes hours would pass before a single word was spoken, and when Thomas did speak, it was never wasted. "Don't fix what you don't understand," he once told Daniel. That was it. No lecture, no repetition, just one sentence that stayed. The tractor Daniel stood beside that morning, the one everyone laughed at, wasn't just old equipment. It had been in that workshop, taken apart, put back together, changed, adjusted, and then changed again. But that part of the story, almost no one knew. Back in the early 1980s, before Daniel was old enough to reach the pedals, Thomas Carter had done a job most people forgot about. He'd worked briefly with a small group of engineers testing early transmission systems for Case IH, not in a corporate lab, not in a clean facility. Out here, in real soil, real conditions, the kind that break machines faster than any controlled test ever could. And one winter cold enough that the ground cracked like glass, they sent him something unusual, not a production model, not something meant for sale, a prototype. It didn't look special. Same frame, same shape, but inside, it was different. The engineers wanted feedback on torque behavior under low speed load. They were trying to solve a problem no one had figured out yet: how to keep power consistent when the ground turned heavy, unpredictable. Most machines either stalled or overcompensated. This one didn't, but it wasn't perfect either. It needed understanding, and Thomas Carter understood things most people didn't have patience for. He kept the machine longer than expected, made adjustments they hadn't asked for, sent back notes no one else would have written, not technical jargon, observations, how it felt, how it sounded, how the soil responded. And when the project ended, something unusual happened. The engineers didn't ask for the tractor back. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe it was a decision. No one ever explained it, but it stayed. In that barn, in that family. And over the years, Thomas changed it further, quietly, carefully, never telling anyone exactly what he did. Daniel didn't understand all of it at the time. He just watched, listened, learned, until the day his father wasn't there anymore. The workshop went silent after that. For a long time, Daniel didn't touch the machine, didn't open it, didn't start it. Grief has a way of making even familiar things feel. But one night, months later, when the wind outside sounded exactly like it had when he was a boy, he walked back into that workshop, turned on the single overhead light, and lifted the hood. What he found inside wasn't just a machine. It was a map, not written in words, but in choices, in welds, in parts that didn't belong to any standard model, in adjustments that only made sense if you had spent years watching someone think without speaking. And in that moment, Daniel realized something most people never do. His father hadn't just fixed machines. He had been finishing something no one else had noticed. And Daniel was the only one left who could understand it. So he didn't sell the tractor, didn't upgrade, didn't chase what everyone else was chasing. He stayed, worked the same land, used the same machine, while the rest of the world moved forward. Or at least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Because what nobody knew, not Rick, not the engineers, not the men, laughing on that gravel lot, was that Daniel Carter wasn't holding on to the past. He was carrying something unfinished. And when the right moment came, it wouldn't look old at all. The letter came 3 days later, folded once, stamped clean, no emotion in the ink. Daniel didn't open it right away. He left it on the kitchen table while he finished his coffee, the same chipped mug he'd been using for nearly 20 years. Outside the window, the fields were still damp from early spring rain, the soil darker than usual, heavier. He already knew what the letter said. Deadlines don't need to be read to be understood. When he finally opened it, the words were exactly what he expected. 90 days. Full repayment. Or foreclosure proceedings would begin. Simple, final, clean. The way men like Rick preferred things. But something about that morning felt different. The air had weight to it. The kind of weight that didn't come from weather. Daniel folded the letter back along its crease and slipped it into the drawer without a word. Then he walked outside. The tractor was where he had left it, just beyond the barn, its faded red body catching a dull reflection of the cloudy sky. To anyone else, it looked like something waiting to be replaced. To Daniel, it looked like something waiting to be finished. He climbed up slowly, resting his hand on the steering wheel for a moment, before turning the key. The engine didn't roar. It breathed. A low, steady sound, almost too calm for something built to fight against soil and resistance. He let it idle, longer than usual. Listening, feeling. There was a rhythm in it. Something subtle. Something most people would have missed entirely. But Daniel didn't miss things like that. He never had. Because while the rest of Cedar Falls had spent the last decade chasing upgrades, chasing speed, chasing what salesmen promised, Daniel had been doing something else, something quieter, something no one noticed. He had been going backward, not in failure, in understanding. Every winter when the fields rested under frost and silence, Daniel opened that machine again. Not to repair what was broken, but to study what had been built. He didn't rush, didn't replace parts just because they were worn. He adjusted, measured, tested. Sometimes he would sit there for hours, one hand resting on a bolt, as if waiting for it to tell him something. And over time, the machine changed. Not visibly, not in ways that would impress anyone standing on a gravel lot. But inside, it became something else. Something more precise, more deliberate, more aware of the work it was meant to do. And this was the part no one in that crowd could have understood. Daniel wasn't trying to keep the machine alive. He was trying to complete what his father had started. Because buried inside that engine, hidden beneath layers of old metal and quiet decisions, there was a pattern, a way the power moved, a way the torque held instead of breaking. It didn't surge the way modern machines didn't overcorrect. It settled into resistance, leaned into it, like it understood that the ground wasn't something to overpower, but something to work with. And once Daniel saw that, he couldn't unsee it. That was when everything began to shift, not on the outside, but where it mattered. He began changing smaller things, the way the fuel fed under load, the balance between speed and pull, the timing of pressure when the soil thickened. None of it dramatic, none of it visible, but piece by piece, the machine became more responsive to the land beneath it than anything built in a factory line. Still, no one noticed, and Daniel didn't tell anyone, because some things don't need to be explained. They just need the right moment, and that moment was getting closer. Because as the days passed, the sky over Cedar Falls began to change. It started with light rain, nothing unusual. Farmers barely paid attention. Then it came again, and again, longer each time, heavier. The kind of rain that doesn't soak in evenly, but lingers, sits, turns soil into something unpredictable. The kind that separates machines that look powerful from machines that actually are. At first, Rick didn't worry. His yard was still full, orders still coming in, men still signing papers. New Case IH models rolled out onto farms that had never seen anything that clean before. Digital controls, automated systems, precision mapping. It all looked impressive, and for a while it worked. Until the ground changed. Because soil like that doesn't care about screens. It doesn't respond to software. It responds to weight, to pressure, to how a machine transfers force when traction disappears. And one by one, those new machines began to struggle. At first it was small things, a delay in response, a slight loss of grip. Then it became something else. Wheels spinning where they shouldn't, engines compensating too hard, systems correcting themselves into inefficiency. And suddenly the confidence that had filled Rick's lot just weeks before began to thin. But Rick didn't admit it. Not publicly. He blamed conditioned blamed operators, blamed anything that didn't point back at what he had sold. Because men like Rick don't lose control all at once. They lose it slowly, while insisting they still have it. Meanwhile, Daniel kept working. Same hours, same fields, same machine. No announcements, no explanations, just steady movement across land that had begun to challenge everyone else. At first, no one paid attention. Then one farmer did. He stopped at the edge of his field one afternoon, engine off, watching from a distance. Daniel's tractor didn't spin, didn't stall, didn't hesitate. It moved forward, like the ground had decided to let it. And that was the moment something shifted, because farmers notice things like that, not immediately. But when they do, they don't forget. The next day, 2 men were watching. Then 3. By the end of the week, trucks began to slow down on the road beside Daniel's land. No one said much. They just watched, trying to understand something they hadn't expected to see. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet attention, a question began to form. Not spoken, but shared. How? And what they didn't realize was that the answer to that question was already sitting in a drawer, folded once, stamped clean, counting down the days. Because while the rain kept falling and the soil kept shifting, Daniel Carter wasn't racing against time the way they thought he was. He was waiting for something else, something that hadn't happened yet, but would. And when it did, it wouldn't just change his fate. It would force an entire town to reconsider what they thought they understood about power. It happened on the 63rd day, not the 90th, not the deadline Rick had printed so neatly on paper. Because moments like this don't wait for deadlines. They arrive when everything else has already begun to fail. The sky that morning was low and gray, pressing down on the land like something unfinished. The rain had stopped overnight, but the damage was already done. Fields across Cedar Falls had turned thick, uneven patches of soil that looked solid from a distance, but swallowed weight the moment it touched. Rick's biggest client, a man named Harold Bennett, had called him before sunrise. 3 machines stuck. Not stalled. Stuck. Brand new case. Units barely a month old, buried just deep enough that traction was gone, but engines still strained against resistance. The kind of situation no brochure ever shows. By mid-morning, half the town was there. Trucks lined the edge of Bennett's field. Boots sank slightly with every step. Men stood in clusters, arms folded, voices low, but sharp. Rick arrived in a clean pickup that didn't belong in mud like this. He stepped out. "Already speaking, but want. It's the soil composition," he said. "This isn't what these systems are calibrated for." The engineer was with him again, nodding quickly, adding words most people didn't fully understand. Adaptive torque distribution. Sensor lag. Moisture variance. It sounded convincing, but it didn't solve anything, because the machines were still there, half buried, silent except for the low, strained hum of engines that couldn't translate power into movement. And then someone said it, quiet at first. "Where's Daniel?" No one answered immediately. But the question didn't go away. It moved, from one man to another, until finally, a truck pulled up at the far edge of the field. Old, dusty, familiar. Daniel didn't rush getting out. He closed the door, looked once across the field, and started walking. No announcement, no greeting, just that same steady pace, boots sinking slightly with each step. Rick saw him before anyone else spoke, and for the first time since that morning on the gravel lot, Rick didn't smile. "Don't," he said louder than necessary. "This isn't a demonstration." Daniel didn't stop, didn't respond. He just kept walking until he reached the edge of the problem. 3 machines. New, expensive, useless. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he's already decided not to argue with. Then he turned back, walked to his tractor, climbed in, and for a brief moment, everything went quiet. No one laughed, no one spoke, because somewhere deep under all the opinions and pride, everyone understood what was about to happen. Not fully, but enough. Daniel turned the key. The engine came alive the same way it always did. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. He let it idle. 1 second, 2, 3, listening, feeling, adjusting something almost no one could see. And then he moved, slow, deliberate. The front tires rolled onto the field, pressing into soil that had swallowed machines twice its size. There was a moment, just one, where it looked like the same thing would happen again. A slight sink, a shift, the ground testing him. And then something changed, not in the sound, not in the speed, in the way the tractor leaned into the resistance. Instead of fighting it, it settled. Power didn't spike. Didn't jerk. It held, steady, controlled, as if the machine understood that forcing the ground wasn't the answer. Working with it was. Daniel guided it toward the first stuck unit. No hesitation, no wasted motion, just a quiet alignment. He stepped down, briefly attached a chain, checked the angle once, and climbed back up. Rick took a step forward. "You'll bury that thing too," he said. Daniel didn't look at him. Didn't need to, because what happened next was the part nobody forgot. He eased the throttle. Not much, just enough. The engine responded, not louder, not faster, but deeper. The kind of response you don't hear, you feel. The chain tightened. For a second, nothing moved. Then, the impossible thing happened. The stuck machine shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, just enough to break resistance. A small movement. But out here, that's all it takes. Daniel didn't increase power, didn't rush. He let the machine do what it was built to do, what it had been refined to do. And slowly, inch by inch, he pulled the first tractor free. No spinning, no strain. Just controlled force moving through something that refused to cooperate with anything else. Silence, complete. Even the wind seemed to step back. He unhooked the chain, moved to the second. Same process, same calm, same result. By the time the third machine came loose, no one was pretending anymore. Rick wasn't speaking. The engineer wasn't explaining. because there was nothing left to explain. 3 machines that represented everything modern agriculture promised had just been outperformed by something they had laughed at. And that wasn't even the real moment. The real moment came after, because Daniel didn't stop. He didn't park, didn't look around for approval. He turned the tractor slightly and drove forward, into the field, into the part no one had been able to work. And in front of everyone, he began to plow. Straight lines, clean, uninterrupted. The soil parted behind him like it had been waiting, not resisting, not breaking, responding. And that was when the shift happened, not in the ground, in the people watching, because belief is a strange thing. It doesn't change all at once. It cracks, slowly, until one moment breaks it completely. By the time Daniel reached the far end of the field, there were no more doubts, only questions, and something else, something quieter. Respect. Rick turned away first, not dramatically, not loudly, just gone, because some defeats don't need witnesses. They just need to happen. And in the days that followed, the real consequences began, not with noise, with decisions. One farmer canceled his order, then another, then 3 more. Men who had signed contracts weeks earlier began asking different questions, not about features, not about price, about performance, about reliability, about things that couldn't be printed on paper. By the end of the 3rd week, 11 farms had walked away. Not all of them came to Daniel. He didn't sell anything, didn't offer, didn't convince. He just kept working. But word spreads in places like Cedar Falls, not through advertisements, through observation, and what they had seen that day stayed. Rick's lot grew quieter, not empty, but different, because once confidence cracks, it never returns the same way. As for Daniel, the 90 days passed, quietly. The letter in the drawer never needed to be answered the way Rick expected, because debt can be paid in more than one way. Some men use money, others change the terms entirely. Daniel kept his land, not because he argued, not because he fought, but because he proved something no contract could ignore. And in the years after, he didn't become what people expected, did not expand, didn't modernize, didn't turn into the man everyone suddenly respected. He stayed the same house, same fields, same machine. Only now, people didn't laugh when they saw it. Sometimes they stopped, watched, not to question, but to understand. And every now and then, someone would ask him how he did it, what was different, what made that machine work when everything else failed. Daniel never gave them a full answer. He would just rest his hand on the metal for a moment, like he was listening to something only he could hear, and then he'd say something simple. Most people try to make machines stronger than the ground. A pause. Then, but the ground doesn't care how strong you are. And that was it. Because the truth of it was never really about the tractor. It wasn't about old versus new, or technology versus experience. It was about something quieter, something people forget too easily. That understanding will always outlast arrogance. That patience will always outwork pride. And that the things we dismiss the fastest are often the ones we never took the time to truly see. Rick Halverson lost 11 farms that year. That's what people remember. But that's not the story. The story is that a man everyone called outdated never needed to prove he was ahead. He just needed the world to catch up.